Today on BRStv Investigates, it's time to really explore the Radion G4 XR15 Pros and show you something really huge related to an upcoming Radion upgrade. Hi, I'm Ryan, your host of BRStv Investigates, a weekly YouTube series which explores popular reefing theories, products, methods, what the manuals are missing with a focus on putting them to the test, and then give away everything that we test at the end. This week we're giving away 4 Radion XR15 Pros on the site and another 4 Apex-ready Radion XR15 Pros at the Neptune's 5th annual meetup at this year's MACNA, which is actually today. Just another cool event for everyone that's engaged in the Apex universe. Outside the XR15s, I also have a prototype diffuser they sent me, and I simply couldn't be more excited to share how this development changes the dynamic of the Radion line. But first, we're going to explore the performance of the Radion XR15 G4 Pro right out of the box. Last week we covered all the visual appeal and available features on the XR30, which are nearly identical on the XR15, so we're not going to bother with that, and this week we're just going to focus solely on coral health aspects related to PAR and spectrum. So the XR15 is basically an XR30 cut in half, meaning rather than 2 pucks, it has 1 and exactly half the price. The one thing that you're going to see here today is 4 XR15s is just a better option than 2 XR30s for a lot of reefers, simply because it gives you the option to distribute the 4 individual pucks over a larger area and gives you better coverage. The main downside is the additional mounting accessories and cords, but at the end of today, you'll be able to make an informed decision on what's best for you and your tank. Diving right into it, we're going to look at coral health factors with providing adequate PAR, how that PAR is distributed in spectrum. Our focus is always on SPS and higher demand corals when evaluating PAR, because almost any common reef tank lighting can provide the lower PAR required for LPS and lower light corals. That range for SPS that we're shooting for is 250 to 350 in as much of the tank as possible. That range coming from our episode called How Much PAR for SPS, which dives into that question from all angles. So starting with the XR15 mounted at the suggested height of 8 inches on our 24-inch cube, we're going to take measurements at 6, 12, and 18 inches deep, starting with all channels at 100%. Keep in mind this will be about half an XR30, which has 2 pucks. At a depth of 6 inches, there's a 36-point average at 242, which indeed is exactly half the 484 average the XR30 had in the same test. I expected it to be close, but not quite spot on like that. We are seeing that predictable hot spot in the center, but because it's only a single puck, it isn't quite as dramatic, and even at the shallow depth of only 6 inches, almost all of the center of the tank is within 100 points of each other. At 12 inches deep, the distribution is about as flat as it gets, with a vast majority of the measurements in the mid to high 200s and perfect for an SPS tank. Similar distribution at 18 inches deep, with most of the readings within 40 points of each other and largely just over or under 200. However, these readings again were at 100% all channels, which is not a setting most people will run. So let's take a look at the XR15 Pro adjusted to the AB Plus spectrum from their Coral Labs experiments, which is what a lot of people run their Radions on. At 6 inches deep, we're seeing a 36-point average of 172, which is roughly a third lower, with mostly 2 and 300 PAR in the center. At 12 inches deep, ultra even distribution, a 36-point average of 162, and almost every point just shy of 200. And similar performance at the bottom, an average of 143, and most of the readings in the low to mid 100s. So it's pretty easy to see here that a single puck in a Radion XR15 Pro is predictably about half the light of its larger brother that has 2 pucks, and in that spirit, if you're going to run all channels at 100% or something close to that, the XR15 puts out enough light to support an SPS dominant tank inside this 2-foot cube. However, most people are going to run it on something like the AB Plus spectrum mix, and I would say the PAR numbers here are more appropriate for a mixed tank with the SPS on the top half of the tank and lower demand corals in the bottom half, or even an LPS tank with the lights turned down to 40 or 50%. Now that was all based on a 2-foot cube, and a 2-puck XR30 might be the best option, but on an SPS dominant tank, I do think a single XR15 would be suitable for an SPS tank if you were going with something like an 18-inch cube or smaller. So let's talk distribution of the light, both with raising it up a couple inches, as well as what happens when we put multiple light sources on a 120 with 2, 3, 4, 6, and even 8 of these arranged evenly over the tank. We raise the light to 11 inches, which is 3 inches higher, and tune the lights to 100% on all channels. Because a single puck is centered in the very middle of the tank, we didn't lose any light or spill over into the room, and the average 36-point PAR was 241, which is just 1 shy of the 242 we had with a mounting height of 8 inches. Predictably, the distribution of the light smooths out when you raise the light up a bit, but it's pretty impressive that the sides in front of the tank are in the neighborhood of only 100 par different than the center of the tank, which at this depth is pretty awesome. Similar results about 12 and 18 inches deep in the tank. Flat distribution. The overall average par only dropped a handful of points by raising the light up to 3 inches. I can tell you for sure, visually raising the light up high doesn't bother me. I would absolutely install it at 11 inches rather than 8 on a 24-inch tank because the distribution of light at the top half of the tank was by far superior at 11 inches. However, on an 18-inch tank, there would probably be a lot of spillover into the room, and I'd likely stick to the 8 or so inch mounting height. So moving over to the 120 with 2 lamps, now all of these results with the various configurations will be with the AB Plus setting, simply because I think they're going to be the most valuable to the average reefer. But if you want to know what 100% on all channels would be, I think you can get pretty darn close by just increasing the numbers by 30% or so. So this is what 2 XR15s look like on a 4-foot, 120-gallon tank at EcoTech's suggested 8 inches off the water. Keep in mind, this is more or less just a dual puck XR30 split in half and placed more uniformly over the tank. You can see the obvious 2 hot spots where the lights are placed above the tank, and other than the edges, most of the par numbers are in the 2 to 400s. At a depth of 12 inches, the light evens out nicely, and you're starting to see a lot of mid-100s around the edge of the tank and 2 to 300s in the center of the tank. At 18 inches deep, low 100s to low 200s, but pretty flat. I don't think anyone had the expectation that 2 XR15s was going to put up awesome SPS numbers in a 120-gallon tank, but I have to say this outperformed my expectations and really is a pretty awesome solution for a mixed tank with well-placed SPS and LPS corals mixed throughout. And on an LPS tank, you're still likely going to have to turn them down considerably. Considering mixed and LPS tanks are by far the most popular, this is actually a fairly economical way to light a 4-foot tank, especially when you consider the features and other benefits associated with Radion lights. It's also scalable for when you want to upgrade tank sizes or make that leap to an SPS dominant tank. It's easy to add additional modules. In that spirit, let's look at the 3 module results. Again, you can see the 2 hot spots, but this time it's exactly where the light intersects between the 3 lamps where the light is the brightest in the tank. That center strip in the tank is fairly even in the 4 to 500s, but the fall off in the outer rings is significant. However, dropping down to 12 inches in the tank, it flattens out quite a bit with a vast majority of the readings in the center of the tank in the 2 to 300s and inside that SPS range that we're looking for. Again, solid distribution at 18 inches of depth with a majority of the readings in those low to high 200s. I honestly think as long as you're willing to run them at near 100%, a lot of reefers could produce really solid results with just 3 of these G4 XR15 Pros, which represents a significant savings over the more common install of 2 XR30s on a 4-foot tank like this one. Again, you can always add a 4th at a later date. Moving on to 4 XR15s on the 120, this is the configuration I was personally most interested in simply because I've always thought there was a lot of value to be had by splitting up the 2 pucks in the XR30 up and distributing them more evenly over the tank. No additional cost, but I do think that you'll see better performance, particularly in the top half of the tank. Starting at a depth of 6 inches and looking at both options side by side, the 2 XR30s have a 66-point average of 373 with 2 very distinct hot spots right under the lights and right on the edge of 700 par. Looking at the same 4 pucks but spread out more evenly with the 4 XR15s, the 66-point average is just a hair lower at 358. You can see there are now 3 hot spots which are between the lights rather than directly under them because they are spaced fairly close together. There are still spots approaching 700 par, but the difference in par between the center ring and the outside rings is less dramatic and the distribution of light is just more even at this depth. Moving down to 12 inches deep in the tank, the already solid performance of the XR30s is improved with the XR15s and the sweet spot is widened, particularly left to right. Other than the back of the tank, almost every point is in the 3 to 500s. Same thing near the bottom of the tank. The sweet spot is distributed further left to right, and now almost every point is in that 250 to 350 range for SPS. End of story. If you have an SPS dominant tank, you're probably still going to tune them down 15 to 30%, but also likely going to see significantly less shadowing and more even distribution of par, which will decrease mortality, increase success, and likely result in more natural growth patterns. On your average mixed or LPS tank, there are some limited gains here because ideal distribution is less important. But one thing I would like to point out, with 4 lights like this, it's not just about distribution, but also about zoning. On more advanced mixed tanks, having the light pucks separate gives you the opportunity to increase or reduce par in certain areas of the tank, which can be really valuable in a mixed tank where you're attempting to house corals which like 100 par a few inches away from corals that prefer 300. Moving on to 6 XR15s, which is the equivalent to 3 XR30s turned sideways, but spaced out a bit more evenly. This is going to distribute light a bit better from front to back. Now I will say this type of install is almost certainly for wall-to-wall SPS dominant tanks, so I wouldn't bother considering how it would perform in other tank types. I'm going to tell you right now that on a 2-foot tank, the 2-puck Radion XR30s are already spaced out fairly well front to back, so the install is fairly similar and there's less significant gains. At a depth of 6 inches, some of the hot spots drop from the 900s into the 800s, but overall, not a dramatic difference. Same thing at 12 inches deep in the tank, separating the modules out into single pucks and spacing them slightly better just doesn't have significant performance gains, and there are now twice as many cords and mounting accessories. Not surprising, the same thing at 18 inches deep, a lot of 400 to 500 par, and will certainly need to be tuned down significantly, but the distribution of 6 XR15s versus 3 XR30s is nearly identical. Now all that said, there's one very significant advantage here that I would like to point out, and one I think a lot of SPS reefers might appreciate. That's that zoning element. With spacing the LED pucks out not just right to left, but now front to back, there's very obvious and desirable coverage and shadowing improvements, but you can also zone these improvements. Meaning that if you have a wall type aquascape in the back of the tank, but open sand in the front of the tank with corals down fairly low, you may very well want to run the back zone of the tank at half the par of the front. Now this is obviously a very advanced approach to lighting a reef tank, but as things progress in the hobby, we're always looking for that next evolutionary leap. I'll save the suspense and share that 4 XR30s were basically the same as 8 XR15s, with one covering basically every square foot of the tank, and the results were pretty similar. Small improvements in distribution at a depth of 6 inches, peak smoothing out from 1,000 back down to 900, but nothing real dramatic. Almost identical performance at 12 inches, both mostly in the 6 to 800s, and at 18 inches deep, very similar performance once again. Overall, I have to say that looking at today's data, if I'm going to install the modules in line from left to right, I see a lot of value in separating the 2-puck XR30s into 2 single XR15s and separating the light out more evenly, and depending on what you're doing, you might need fewer and can save a substantial amount of money. However, if you're looking for performance gains by lighting the front and back of the tank, I would just stick to the XR30s just because it's a lot simpler install with fewer cords. However, if you're interested in zoning the tank and treating various areas of the tank differently because either the corals or aquascape in that area would benefit from it, I would absolutely consider XR15s as a better option for that. In addition to that, these comments are based on a 24-inch deep tank. If your tank is 2.5 to 3 feet from front to back, you will absolutely see significant gains from spreading the single pucks out more evenly. So moving on to spectrum, last week we already discussed how the Radion spectrum offering is one of the widest and most inclusive of all the lighting options out there. However, the spectrum blending of all those individual peaks are blended together less than perfectly. In air, the HEI lenses overlap the individual spectrums pretty well and over a fairly wide area. However, once we add surface ripples into the mix, the spectrum is not as uniformly blended and changes from moment to moment. Something that you can see with the naked eye with separated colors on the back of the tank and sand. Rather than cover that again, this is where today everything changes and we show you the new diffuser from EcoTech. This is just a prototype, but I'm told they'll be available in the reasonably near future. It's designed to be attached to existing Radions, so everyone out there who already owns their lighting can be happy the upgrade will be easy. So what is a diffuser? More or less, it's just a thin sheet of white plastic which diffuses the individual light sources or LEDs into a single illuminated panel. Net result is the colors are blended together much better. Shimmer is less aggressive, and the tank just looks better on all fronts. One of the team members here called this a total game changer. I'm going to say I think it goes beyond that. I know it's just a thin piece of plastic, but it revolutionizes performance and virtually eliminates many of the perceived negatives with the line. So I'm going to share 3 performance aspects the diffuser affects: shimmer in the tank, spectrum blending, and par levels. Starting with Shimmer, the diffuse panel takes what most people would refer to as pretty significant disco effects with easy to identify color separation and blends it into a much more muted shimmer, very close to what I would refer to as the ideal shimmer with zero visual color separation. Meaning I don't think anyone who's actively selling reef lighting in the US is doing this better. It's hard to show on camera, but in person, I would say the Shimmer now adds that desirable sense of movement to the tank we all want, but without that distracting flicker that takes away from enjoying the tank. Simply bringing life and movement to the tank without taking away from anything else. In case you're wondering, now that I've seen it in person, I don't think there's a single instance where I would run Radions on my tank and not one of these. Visually, this is just a grand slam. Looking at spectrum blending, first the static spectrum with 9 measurement points in air with the light 19 inches above the sensors. This is the 9 points without the diffuser. You can see there are subtle differences at the 9 different points, but not overly dramatic. Now with the diffuser on in the same test, you can see there's a pretty obvious and notable improvement, and the spectrum is in the same category as some of the best in the industry. Now looking at the more challenging test with the dynamic spectrum blending and how the light, lenses, and diffuser blend the individual LED spectrums once the light has to pass through the water. We add a power head to break the surface tension and then take 9 measurements from below the tank. First, looking at it without the diffuser, you can see there are some pretty significant variations in spectrum as the individual LEDs are reflected off the surface ripples. Now looking at the XR15 with the diffuser installed, you can see there are some pretty significant gains here. The spectrum blending isn't what I would call perfect, but I think anyone would agree the improvement is fairly dramatic. Now looking at par, this is a double-edged sword. There are some losses here as well as some gains. First, the sheet of diffusion plastic is going to reduce par to some degree. There's no way around it. The only real question then becomes, is it worth it? Let's compare the XR15 without the diffuser with all the channels at 100%. Without the diffuser, we're looking at a 36-point average at 242 and the predictable hotspot in the center with par levels approaching 500 and levels as low as 29 in the outer corners. With the diffuser, the 36-point average drops down to 194 par, which means there was about a 20% reduction in overall par, which is actually a smaller reduction than I anticipated. However, the diffused panel of lighting is performing closer to a diffused light source like T5s than single points of intense lights, with low 400s in the center, and the outer corners are now double to triple that par with 70 to 80 rather than 30 to 40 without the diffuser. Moving down to 12 inches deep in the tank, the standard Radion XR15 with no diffuser, there's a 36-point average par of 225, and you can see the distribution is fairly flat, but not exactly what I would call uniform. Adding the diffuser onto the light, the 36-point average drops to 177, which again is around a 20% loss in overall par. The light distribution is now incredibly uniform and evenly distributed. The center of the tank is now mostly within 30 to 40 points of each other, taking already solid performance and making it both better and more predictable. Going down to 18 inches into the tank, without the diffuser, we have an average par of 201 with a fairly flat distribution, but the highest number is focused on the front and sides of the tank. With the diffuser, the 36-point average drops to 158 and again around 20% reduction. However, this is now a nice even blanket of light. There's a lower strip along the back of the tank because it's painted black, but a vast majority of the tank is within 10 or 20 par of each other. This was the type of performance that I'd only previously seen with other diffused light sources like T5s. So all in all, there's a 20% reduction in par, and performance comes with an efficiency cost. For some reefers, that cost might be too high, and they prefer to save the power. However, I think a lot of reefers will trade some degree of energy efficiency for performance gains, such as visual improvements like awesome shimmer and color blending, improved spectrum blending, which hasn't been proven but very likely has coral health, growth, and coloration benefits, as well as more even and predictable par distribution, which in many instances results in more uniform growth patterns. Let's hope these new diffusion plates are released soon. So this is the most important part of the day, where we ask, Who wants a Radion XR15 for free? Just like every other week, we're giving away all the lights we tested today, so sign up for your chance to win one of the 4 XR15 Radions by clicking the link that just showed up or heading on over to the Bulk Reef site, specials and deals, and then click on free stuff. Congratulations to the 4 lucky reefers who attended Neptune's Magnum meetup this morning and won the other XR15s. If there was ever a week where I can't wait to hear what all of you have to say, it's certainly this week. So check out the Reef to Reef link down below and join the larger conversation. Not just on multiple XR15 versus XR30s, but obviously what do you think about diffusers and the potential they represent? If you like what we're doing here and value the type of information we share, let us know with a quick thumbs up and hit that subscribe button because we release new reefing videos all week long and new BRStv Investigates every Friday.